So, as current day guitarists, we live in an environment full of alternate notational systems, which include tablature, chord symbol notation, and number notation systems, which include the Roman numeral system and the Nashville number system. Now, each of these systems allows non-reading guitarists the ability to effectively communicate harmonic and melodic information without having to read standard musical notation. Wow, that's great. No messy, boring lessons needed anymore. But wait a second, there's something that's missing. How do we successfully communicate rhythmic information? Well, unfortunately, unless there's something out there that I'm unaware of, in order to accurately notate rhythms, rhythmic notation is pretty much the only game in town. But I think I've figured out an easy way to explain and manage all things rhythmic. Let's talk about note values and time signature algebra. Now, our very first step is to identify or define the different layers and quantities and values of rhythm. So generally speaking, here's the breakdown. A whole note equals 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Off. Now, in a rhythmic cycle of 4, it takes up that entire cycle. So it stands to reason that if a whole note equals 4 counts, then a half note equals 2 counts, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Off. So in other words, two half notes occupy the same space as one whole note. Now, surely you can guess the next note value, right? So the quarter note equals 1 count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Off. Now, another way to think of this is that 2 quarters equal 1 half, or 4 quarters equal a whole note. So eighth notes equal half a count. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Off. So in other words, there are 2 eighth notes per count, and we count them like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so on and so forth. So have you spotted the pattern yet? Well, each note type is half the value of the previous note type, and conversely, there can be twice as many of them in the same space of time as the previous note type. Now, if we continue the sequence, we see that 16th notes receive a quarter of a count, a 32nd note receives an eighth of a count, and so on and so forth. Now, each of these note types also have a slash notation equivalent. Well, what is slash notation? Well, now these types of note symbols generally indicate the value of a single note or a group of specifically written notes. So when we want to indicate the rhythmic value of an entire chord without having to write out every note which comprises that chord, we use a slash version of the note symbol. Now, whole notes look like a diamond, and a half note will look like a diamond with a stem on it. And quarter notes look like a hash mark with a stem on it. And then an eighth note will look like a quarter, but it has a flag on the end of it. Now, if you kind of squint your eyes and tilt your head to the side a little bit, you'll notice that these slash notations really do look like their traditional equivalents. Now, before we go on, real quickly, let's address the flagged notes. In other words, eighth notes and 16th notes. And of course, we can keep dividing 32nd, 64ths. Now, if we see a pair or more of flagged notes, and it doesn't matter whether it's traditional notation or slash notation, we replace them with a beam. Now, the great thing about beaming notes together is that we can safely assume that every note under that beam or above that beam is inside of 1 count. Now, there are exceptions to the beaming rule, but they're not really relevant to today's topic. So when you want to indicate a specific chordal rhythm, you write the chord's name over the appropriate rhythm figures. And this just tells us that we play a half note on a C chord, a quarter note each on an F and a G, and then we end on a C chord whole note. And there's one more thing to consider. The slash with no stem is most commonly used as a quarter note. And you know, in a future video, I'll use some slash notation as a tool for deciphering and mapping more complex rhythmic ideas. So let's shift gears a little and talk about measures. Well, measures are simply the rhythmic cycles, which I used a little earlier to demonstrate each note value. And they're called, in musical terminology, measures. In other words, we use these groups to measure a set number of counts, which will cycle through and into the next measure unless the value of that following cycle changes. So, how do we identify and understand what a measure is? Well, we use bar lines, and there are several types. And number one is the garden variety bar line. And all it does is divide the steady stream of counts or beats into bite-sized chunks. And those bite-sized chunks happen to be the measures, by the way. We can also have a double bar line, which also divides beats into bite-sized chunks, but it also indicates the end of a section of music. We can also have the repeat sign, which is simply a double bar line with two little dots, and it tells us to go back to the beginning or to the nearest opposite facing repeat sign. And notice that the two little dots can be on either side of the double bar. And then our final one is appropriately titled the final bar line. And notice it's a double bar line with a heavier line on the right. And that heavy line tells us that we're at the end of a song. So if we want a good idea of what this all looks like in the real world, here's an example of a chord progression which uses all of the bar line types and a variety of slash rhythms. Now, I'm going to have to look at this and read it because I just wrote this out. This isn't a song that I wrote or anything, or a specific song that really exists in reality. It's just a demonstration of all the different things. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to repeat now. Next section. Next section. All right, now that we've identified the basic rhythmic values and bar line types, how do we make sense of them? Well, there are multiple ways, but generally in the West, we use the idea of meter, which is represented by the time signature. And all the time signature is a numerical value which assigns a number of counts or beats and note types to a measure or measures. In other words, it's a matrix or a grid of reliably repeating cycles of beats. Again, what we call the meter. So what does it look like? Well, as we can see, it looks like a fraction, sort of. The top number tells us the number of beats in a measure, 4, and the bottom number tells us the type of count or the type of note, which gets 1 count. So I'm sure some of you out there are thinking, but wait, you said a quarter note equals 1 count. Well, in general, you're correct, but there are exceptions, and we'll deal with those in another video. But let's just go back into this and decode exactly what this means. So we've already said that the top number tells us there are 4 counts in each measure, right? That's a piece of cake. And the bottom number tells us that a quarter note occupies each of these counts. So again, I probably hear some of you out there saying, well, wait a minute, shouldn't a whole note get the beat? After all, the bottom number is a 4, and a whole note gets 4 counts, right? Well, I can understand your reasoning, but like I said earlier, the time signature looks like a fraction. So let's treat it like one. So if we think about it, 4 over 4, if we proceed algebraically, is the same thing as 4 times 1 over 4. If we don't reduce, correct? So what this is telling us, the whole number, is simply telling us that we have 3 notes in this measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that each of those counts is occupied by a quarter note. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, by the way, if we do reduce, we get a note value of 1, which takes up the entire measure of 4 counts. In other words, 1 note takes up those 4 counts, a whole note. It's kind of spooky, huh? So this means that 3/4 time simply tells us that there are 3 quarter notes in a measure. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Or we could say that 5/8 simply tells us that 5/8 notes occupy a measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, the most common time signatures you're likely to encounter, and we'll deal with all of these at some point, will be 4/4, which we've already discussed, and it's also known as common time, and it can be indicated with just a large C. 3/4 time, which is usually known as waltz time. We also have 2/4 time, which is march time, and then we have 6/8, which is a mess and has its own particular sets of issues. And again, we'll deal with that later. Now, learning to strum rhythmically and fluidly through each of these meters is essential to becoming a well-rounded and an employable guitarist. Now, for everybody watching, I want you to understand that the function of this video is not to turn you into a rhythm reading machine. These are simply the basic concepts. But you know, with a little bit of work, you should be able to begin deciphering and executing written rhythms fairly quickly and proficiently. And to help you attain that goal, here are some rhythmic studies to help you get started. Feel free to copy these rhythms down so you can work on them at your leisure. And then in a couple of weeks, meet me back here for a supplemental video where we'll break down each of these rhythmic studies and you'll be able to check your progress. So a little later this weekend, I'll be posting a short video of the Crumbs, my bluegrass group, in the studio recording one of the songs that's going to be on our upcoming album. We have some guest performances on it, so definitely check that out. Thanks for watching String 'em Up. My name's Dave Holland, and remember to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy the channel's content. Also, feel free to leave comments and suggestions for any topics you might like to see in future episodes. Have fun, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.